Okay, so we're diving deep today. Relationship trauma, huh? Lots of you requested this one. And after going through all the research, wow. Um,
Heavy stuff, no doubt.
it really is, yeah. And it's something so many people deal with, but
Doesn't get talked about nearly enough.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So before we really jump in, just want to say if anything we talk about today hits a little too close to home.
Definitely take care of yourselves, okay? If you need to, pause this, come back to it later, whatever you got to do.
Seriously, yeah. Okay, so big picture, what really stood out to you from all this research?
I think the first thing that really struck me was how relationship trauma is defined. It's not always like
Yeah.
some big dramatic, thing.
Right,
It can be
right.
a lot more subtle, right? Like a bunch of smaller things that build up over time.
Like emotional cuts
Yeah,
almost.
exactly. Emotional, psychological, even physical, all happening within a relationship.
And those cuts, even if they seem small at the time, they can leave some serious scars.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. They can affect your self-worth, your future relationships, like all kinds of things.
It's crazy how something that might seem minor at the time can have such a big impact down the road.
It really is. And I think it's important to point out, we're not just talking about romantic relationships here.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that, but
It can be family relationships, friendships, even work relationships.
right. Anywhere where there's a power imbalance or, a violation of that trust. So
Exactly.
basically, any important relationship in our lives is susceptible to this.
Absolutely. And, that's what makes this deep dive so important, to
Yeah.
really dig into all the different ways this trauma can show up.
Okay, so let's get specific, huh? The research outlined like 7 types of relationship trauma. I'm curious which one sort of like jumped out at you.
That's a great question. I mean, they all have their own, dynamics,
Yeah.
but the one that really kind of stuck with me was gaslighting.
Gaslighting, yeah, I mean, that term gets thrown around a lot these days, but
Right.
it's important to really understand what it is?
Yeah, it's a form of manipulation that's so uh, insidious because it messes with your sense of reality.
Okay, so break that down for us. Like,
Listen.
what does that actually look like in a relationship?
Okay, so imagine you're with someone and they're constantly denying your experiences, telling you you're misremembering things,
Oh, wow.
saying you're overly sensitive, or even like making things up.
Yikes.
Yeah, and over time, that can really chip away at your confidence, make you question your own judgment.
So it's not just like disagreeing or having different perspectives, it's
Right.
more about intentionally distorting the other person's reality.
Exactly. It's about power and control, and, it can make you feel like you're going crazy.
Wow. That's intense.
Yeah, it really is.
It's not always, loud and obvious, but the effects can be really, really damaging. So, gaslighting is one example, but, there are other types of relationship trauma,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
like emotional abuse, where there's constant criticism, belittling, or trying to control the other person.
And that can really wear someone down over time.
Yeah, like slowly draining their energy, their self-esteem.
Exactly, yeah.
And then there's physical abuse.
Right. Which can be anything from, hitting to pushing, any kind of violence that causes physical harm.
Yeah, that one is, I think, a little easier to spot, but
Yeah, that can be more obvious.
the emotional scars, I imagine, run just as deep.
Oh, for sure. The fear, the shame, the violation of trust, all of that can linger for a long time.
And of course, there's sexual abuse as well.
Right. Any kind of unwanted sexual contact, pressure, or assault within a relationship.
And that can be incredibly difficult to process, I mean.
Yeah.
It violates so many boundaries, physical and emotional.
Absolutely. It can impact your sense of safety, your ability to trust, everything.
And the source also mentions betrayal trauma, which is like infidelity, lying, broken promises, that kind of thing.
Right. And those things can really shatter the foundation of a relationship.
Totally. It's like the rug gets pulled out from under you. You
Exactly.
think you have this solid foundation, and then boom, it's gone.
Yeah. And the pain of that betrayal can be incredibly disorienting.
And then there's neglect, which can be so subtle, but
Mhm.
so damaging.
It really can. Yeah.
The source describes it as a consistent lack of attention, care,
Mhm.
support.
Right. And even though it might seem passive compared to some of the other types we've talked about, it can create a deep sense of loneliness and worthlessness.
Yeah, like you're invisible, you're not even there.
Exactly. And if that goes on for too long, it can really mess with your sense of self.
Like you start to believe you don't deserve love and care.
Yeah. It's heartbreaking.
And finally, there's the trauma of witnessing or experiencing domestic violence.
Right. Which can have a huge impact, especially on kids.
I can't even imagine, to be exposed to that kind of violence, especially at a young age.
It can be really, really tough. And, even if a child isn't directly abused,
Mhm.
just witnessing it
Yeah.
can be incredibly traumatizing.
Wow. So we've covered a lot of heavy stuff here.
We have.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that before we move on.
Yeah, definitely.
If anything we've talked about is resonating with you, if it's bringing up any difficult emotions,
Please know that you're not alone.
yeah, and that there is help available.
Absolutely. Reaching out for support is a sign of strength.
It really is. So take a moment, breathe, and if you need to, pause this and come back when you're ready.
We'll be here.
Wow. So, we just went through all the types of relationship trauma.
Yeah, it's a lot,
It
right?
is. It's like a lot to process, even just hearing about it.
Absolutely. But, even though it's heavy,
Yeah.
I think it's really important to understand how it shows up.
Right. Like recognizing the different forms it can take.
Exactly. So we can start to see those patterns maybe in our own lives or in the lives of people we care about.
Yeah, totally. Like bringing it out into the open.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and talk about the effects of relationship trauma.
Okay.
We touched on this a bit earlier, but I want to go deeper. Like, what are the long-term consequences of these experiences?
Well, one of the biggest things is how trauma can shape our worldview, like our beliefs about relationships,
Mhm.
whether we deserve love, all of that.
It's like we develop this filter, right?
Mm.
And it's colored by our past experiences.
Exactly. So, for example, if you've been betrayed in the past,
Yeah,
you might start to see everyone as potentially untrustworthy.
right. Or if you grew up in a family where like emotional needs were ignored,
Hmm.
you might end up in relationships where that pattern continues.
Yeah, it's like we're drawn to what's familiar,
Mhm.
even if it's not healthy for us.
It's crazy how that works.
It really is.
Yeah. And that brings us to another important point, like the impact on self-esteem.
Right.
You mentioned earlier how emotional abuse can like chip away at your sense of self.
Yeah. Yeah. So imagine, you know, being constantly criticized, put down, told you're not good enough.
Oof.
Over time, those messages, they can really sink in.
Look, they become part of your internal dialogue,
Exactly. You start to believe them, even if they're not true.
and that can affect how you act, how you see yourself, everything.
Yeah, you might find yourself like always seeking approval from others
Mm.
or afraid to take risks because you're so scared of failing.
Right, or even like sabotaging your own success.
Exactly, because deep down, you don't think you deserve it.
It's like that inner critic becomes so loud.
It can be really powerful, yeah.
And this is something I've always found fascinating, but trauma doesn't just affect us mentally and emotionally, right?
Right.
It affects our physical health too.
Absolutely, yeah, it's all connected.
So, like, explain that connection for us.
Okay, so when we experience trauma, our bodies go into this fight, flight, or freeze mode.
Yeah, like a survival mechanism.
Exactly, and that's normal, right?
Yeah.
But when the trauma is ongoing, like in an abusive relationship, your body is basically in this constant state of stress.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and that pumps out all these stress hormones like cortisol, adrenaline.
So it's like your body never gets a break.
Right, it's like you're always on high alert,
Yeah.
even when there's no actual danger.
And that takes a toll, right?
Oh, yeah, it can weaken your immune system, mess with your sleep,
Mm,
cause digestive problems, even increase your risk of things like heart disease and diabetes.
seriously.
Yeah, it's crazy how interconnected everything is.
It really is. It's like trauma isn't just in your head.
Right.
It affects your whole being.
Absolutely.
So, okay, let's talk about healing then. If someone is recognizing these patterns in themselves,
Wow.
what can they do?
Well, the good news is healing IS possible.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's not, quick or easy,
Right.
but it can be done.
Uh,
And I think the first step is just acknowledging the trauma.
yeah, like naming it. Yeah.
Saying, hey, this happened and it's affected me.
But it doesn't have to control me.
Exactly.
So, what are some of the ways people can start to heal? What are the like most effective approaches?
Well, therapy is often a really good place to start.
Yeah, makes sense.
Working with a therapist who understands trauma can give you a safe space to process those experiences,
Mhm.
challenge those negative beliefs you've developed.
Right, and learn how to cope in healthier ways.
Exactly.
What else can be helpful?
Things like mindfulness, meditation, yoga.
Oh, yeah. I've heard that can be really good for like regulating your emotions and stuff.
Yeah, it can help you stay grounded in the present moment.
instead of getting caught up in the past.
Exactly.
And self-compassion is huge too, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Treating yourself with kindness.
Yeah, like you would a friend.
Exactly. You've been through something difficult. It's okay to not be okay.
Yeah, we're often way too hard on ourselves. Well, we are.
Yeah.
And another thing that's really important, having a good support system.
Hmm.
People who love you, support you, believe you.
Yeah. Surrounding yourself with people who lift you up.
And sometimes that means like distancing yourself from people who are toxic, you know?
Yeah. Sometimes that's necessary for sure.
It's about creating that safe and supportive environment for yourself.
Absolutely.
And it's important to remember, healing, it's not a straight line, right?
Right.
There are going to be ups and downs, setbacks.
Definitely.
It's a journey.
It is. Yeah. And it takes time.
So be patient with yourself, celebrate the small victories, and never give up hope.
Yeah. You're stronger than you think.
I love that. Okay, so we've talked about the tops of trauma, the effects, the healing process. Now, I'm curious, what about building new, healthier relationships after experiencing trauma? Like, how do you break free from those old patterns? It's amazing to me how we went from talking about, like, all this heavy stuff to now feeling this...
This sense of hope.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's like we went through the darkness, and now we're, like, coming out the other side.
And that's the thing about healing,
Yeah.
It's not about forgetting or erasing the past.
Right.
It's about learning from it and using it to create something better.
I love that. So as we're like stepping into the space of creating healthier relationships, what are some of the like key things we need to remember?
Okay, well, it all starts with self-awareness.
Okay, yeah, we've talked about that a lot. But
It's so important, right?
it is.
Like understanding your patterns, your triggers, your needs, your boundaries.
It's like knowing yourself inside and out.
Exactly. So you can make choices that are in line with what you truly want and need.
And like avoid those situations that might, trigger those old patterns.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so speaking of like things to avoid, what are some red flags people should look out for, especially if they've, experienced trauma in the past?
I think one of the biggest ones is inconsistency between words and actions,
Oh, yeah, like someone says one thing but does another.
Right. If someone says they're trustworthy and respectful, but their actions don't match up.
That's a problem.
Big problem. Yeah. Actions speak louder than words, right?
Totally. And, another thing I've learned, like how someone handles conflict.
That's huge.
That can tell you a lot about them.
It really can. Do they shut down, get defensive, try to blame you?
Yeah, or like manipulate the situation.
All of those are signs that they might not be able to handle disagreements in a healthy way.
Yeah, it's not about avoiding conflict altogether. It's about how you approach it,
Exactly. Healthy relationships involve being able to communicate openly and respectfully, even when things are tough.
It's like being on the same team, working together to find a solution.
Exactly. And that brings us to communication in general.
Yeah, communication, it seems so simple, but
It can be really hard, right?
it can, especially after trauma.
Yeah, trauma can make us afraid to speak up, set boundaries.
Yeah, you might worry about being rejected or abandoned or... Totally.
So, like, how do you overcome that fear?
Well, I think it starts with getting really clear on your own needs and boundaries.
Okay, so, like, what do you need to feel safe and respected in the relationship?
Exactly. And once you know that, you can start practicing communicating those things.
Yeah. Start small, maybe with a friend or family member.
Just practice saying no, expressing your preferences.
Yeah, like build up those communication muscles.
Exactly.
And, communication is a two-way street, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's not just about expressing yourself. It's about listening to your partner, trying to understand where they're coming from.
Yeah, finding that balance between speaking your truth and really hearing the other person.
It's like creating that space for open and honest dialogue,
I love that.
where both people feel heard and respected.
That's what it's all about.
But even with all of this, the self-awareness, the communication, the boundaries, like there might still be times when those old patterns creep back in, right?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, healing isn't linear. It's like you take a few steps forward and then, boom, you're back to square one.
It happens. And in those moments, self-compassion is so important.
Yeah, like don't beat yourself up about it.
Exactly. Be kind to yourself. Remember that you're doing the best you can.
And reach out for support if you need it.
Yeah, your therapist, friends, family, anyone you trust.
It's okay to ask for help.
It is. And remember, you're not alone in this.
Well, I have to say, this deep dive has been, like, really eye-opening.
Me too.
It's heavy stuff, but it's also, like, really hopeful,
It is, because Even though relationship trauma can have a huge impact on our lives,
Yeah.
we can heal from it.
And we can create healthier, more fulfilling relationships.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And to everyone listening, if anything we've talked about today has resonated with you,
If you're feeling overwhelmed or triggered,
please know that you are not alone.
there are resources available to help you.
Therapists, support groups, hotlines, there's help out there.
So please reach out. You deserve to heal. You deserve to be happy. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
Until next time, take care.